Hey, fellow G&Ters, those of us like our spirituality with a twist. If you happen to be watching us on video, you might be thinking, wait, who is that fresh and friendly face I'm seeing? And it is one Ryan K. Davenport, our anthropologist on call that we've mentioned in different episodes along the way. He's one of our social scientists, contributors from afar, but now here in person. Thanks so much for coming on, Ryan.
Absolutely. Happy to be here.
Yeah, so we have talked to you about different sort of social science things, and we're in the midst of doing our little series on cults. And as we were talking about this, we really, we kind of realized in our conversations, you and I were chatting about this, that we're so close to your wheelhouse that you were like, hey, it makes sense for you to come on and contribute. So it should be good.
I'll do
Um,
what I can.
Yeah. We've gotten to the point where, well, our idea is what? Just if you haven't caught the rest of these episodes, we're in a part of a series. Part of the idea is really kind of talking about what's happening in the United States now, and we're kind of trying to contribute to our own part of the conversation, which is just saying there's a lot of cult stuff going on as we're recording in May of 2025. But also, it's sort of an exploration of maybe like cult psychology as a human vulnerability overall.
Yeah, cult psychology, social psychology, mass thinking, and the influences that the zeitgeist, cultural influence have on people in general and their own little pockets.
Yeah, so we've done social psychology on like conformity.
Hmm.
Part of that was talking about like social roles, and we looked at the Zimbardo experiment, and we've gotten to like an exciting part of these episodes because we're going to talk about resistance to conformity and dissent. So definitely part of our G&T theme, and so we're in that spot. And speaking of dissent and resistance, I'm going to say the usual thing that people always say: if you want to help us to resist and dissent against the evils of the algorithm, that cult, you can do all the things that everybody asks you to do, which would be the liking and the subscribing and everything that everyone says, with everyone acknowledging that it just helps you do better with the algorithm. So thanks so much for that. That can be your way of expressing maybe your resistance and dissent. Give us like a little thumbs up or something. Otherwise, we'll get into conversation about resistance to conformity from like sort of a social psych point of view. You have anything you want to contribute to this first, though, Ryan? Any initial thoughts, or should we jump on in?
I think you just jump on in and I'll add where I can.
All right, sounds great. So, we're going through this in different parts, and Ryan may really be a guest for multiples of these because it's a lot of social science stuff. But on the social psychology part, the first part is just looking at like it's not so much, it's kind of interesting. It's not so much about like what makes someone resist, but what happens in a group once someone starts to resist. So it's a little bit more of an exploration of that. And I can kind of put together some social psychology ideas around this. One of the first things that's really striking in these psych studies is it doesn't take a lot to induce conformity. Apparently, it's like a very small number of people in a social psych kind of experimental setting, and people will start to conform. So the numbers are kind of interesting. It's less people than what you would think. And so they've looked at it, and really, if you get three or four people starting to be conforming against, one other person in the group, the tendency will be for that last person to start to conform.
Out of how many people, though?
Well, I mean, the thing is that the numbers don't have to be that big. That's the point. So you have like one person and three other people, and they can force the other person to conform. So
Hmm.
the groups aren't that big,
Hmm.
you know? Usually in these things, there's like maybe one person who's the actual subject, and the rest of them are sort of like people who are acting out their parts. But
Hmm.
it doesn't take a lot of pressure to get people to conform. That's one of the first observations, right? And like the weird part about that too is they found that even if you start adding more and more people, it doesn't really matter past a certain point. So, and it says something about, I guess, like social pressure, and it doesn't take a lot to get people to start already starting to adjust their behavior. So that's one of the first things that they kind of do with this. You got
Hmm.
any thoughts on that, either one of you?
I think there's another episode, if I recall, where you mentioned that there was a certain percentage of people, like I want to say it was like 30% or something that
Yeah.
yeah,
The
needed.
magic third.
Yeah. Um, does that relate to this concept as well, Eric, or is this like a completely different thing?
Well, I think the idea is that you can get those people to start to conform within those numbers. But what's weird, there's like different studies around this. We'll get to another one later on where they get people going even up to like 70%. So there's kind of variations. It doesn't always have to be this 33% thing, right?
Yeah.
And so different studies have different things about that. I think in the ash one though, which is the line comparison one, that's the one that seems to be like within that 30 something range, depending on the conditions. But other ones seem to go even higher. So, I mean, I think the idea here maybe is like, as far as like the psychology of conformity that we've been exploring, is just to show that it doesn't take a lot to get that to kick in. You don't have to have some huge group against you. It can be a relatively small number of people, and people will already start sort of acquiescing to that, which might say something about vulnerability, to that phenomenon. Does that make sense to you all?
Yeah, it makes sense, but I would, I think the other component here, and I don't want to like kind of jump to like another episode you're thinking about, but I imagine a lot is in reference to personality, like dominant personalities, passive personalities and so forth, right?
Well, don't
Well, I
get
think
Eric started on this.
I knew it was dangerous, right? So
no, the thing about it, and this is just like I'm trying to be true to this research as much as I
yeah,
can for these things because
yeah,
you can kind of riff on them in different ways. So I'm trying to be like, okay, let me present what they say, and then
Right.
at least
okay,
from that point of view. And what they're trying to show in this is that it's independent of like personality type on some level. I mean, that's the whole thing in the Zimbardo one, the Stanford Prison one, which is the last one we just did.
yeah,
Which is like their point is that it's not so much about the personalities of the individuals. It's more like, like you'll like this phrase from Durkheim, the famous sociologist, but it's more about the social facts than it
okay,
is about like individual personality differences so much. So, I mean, I'm sure there's personality differences in this for sure, and I'm sure if
Hmm.
all three of us, they showed us some fucked up lines we would all resist. All three of us here. None of us would crack. But I
hopefully,
think I'm
right,
saying it's sort of like it's weird in the sense that like it has the argument in this thing is that it has less to do with individual personality types and more to do with like just the social setting. That's the dominant thing, or at least that's what they're looking at. So what struck me about this on like, I was trying to have some personal reactions to this, and I realized like I think since I was young, I sort of picked up on this. I don't know how it was for you all, but I've always sort of like not liked bigger groups of people on some level because like you could just see like the fake versions of people come out. And I think even when I was like, in my teens and when you started like looking at how people behave, maybe even younger, I was like more like one-on-one interactions because I would feel like I would get more of an authentic version of that person. And then all of a sudden you're in a group setting, you're like, well, what's this fake ass shit going on here, right?
Mm.
So I had like sort of an intuitive sense of that. So, anyways, I thought I would throw that out there because that I did personally feel that on some level. Is that something you all thought about when you were younger too?
yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think when I was an undergrad, and I was just watching, and like I had friends who it was really kind of curious, because like I had friends who were in like fraternities, like and at one-on-one, super cool, right? And then like you watch them and they get, this I'm not trying to trash fraternities, but we could spend some time on that, all right? And because there is a lot to trash.
Yeah.
But yeah, then you get them in the fraternity with the fraternity brothers. It's like, whoa, what the hell happened to this person?
Yeah.
Like they completely changed and became like all these other like, you know, I don't know, fraternity bros or something. It was really interesting phenomenon. I'm like, holy shit. It was kind of actually freaked me out a little bit.
Yeah, I think that's kind of what they're picking up on in this.
Yeah.
And it doesn't take a lot of people to do that. All of a sudden you get that person just in another
Yeah.
group and it'll just elicit a completely different aspect of like
Mm.
who they are or something. Or they'll just go
Yeah.
to whatever the group thinking is of that group. I sometimes have had some weird like I mean funny conversations where I was like, well, I don't really want to hang out with you and your family. I'll hang out with you,
Yeah.
but I don't want to hang out with you and your spouse because you're just a different person, or you and your family, or you like you're just not the same person. And I don't it's bad to say it, but you could almost be like, well, I don't really like that person.
She's
Like
like,
what
but Eric, it's Christmas and you're my boyfriend.
fuck that. I'm not hanging out with you and your family.
I'm
No.
not hanging out with you and your spouse, and I'm not hanging out with you and your family.
Well, you have more of the community thing than me, Daniel. But I would be like, no, you all have your Christmas without me, and I'll catch up with you later.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting because I definitely understand. I mean, I was never part of a fraternity. I guess I lived a little bit differently. I was never part of a fraternity or anything. I worked through school and paid for that as I went. Like I didn't have any help or anything like this, just my military and whatever. Um, and so I never had that college experience. And I work with people whose kids go to college and they have that experience, their kids have that experience, and I'm like, whatever, that shit's not real. You know what I mean? Like it's not a real thing. It's a collection of like artificially gathered people who are supposed to be there for a merit-based process, and they're drinking and hanging out and partying and whatever, and like this is higher education. Okay. All right. That sounds wonderful. So I never got that part. But I do think that there is something to be said about like pressure to conform, pressure to fit in. It is not implicit, but it totally is there. When we go, you know what I mean? Right? You know what I'm saying? Like you're looking to like vibrate on the same level as whoever it is that you're speaking with. And I mean, even I do it even now. Some find myself sometimes laughing at something. I'm like, oh yeah. And I'm like, wait, that in my head, I'm like, that actually wasn't that funny. Why am I laughing right now? I guess I'm just trying to make this person feel good. You know what I'm saying? And then I think you extrapolate that on a larger level, and I don't know. I think you can be coerced without even being conscious about it.
Yeah, it makes me think of sort of the notion of like maybe I wonder if there's like an inherent desire for like social harmony, right?
Mm-hmm.
And to avoid conflict. If we go back, and Eric's gonna hate this, we go back to our early ancestors, and we think about sort of, kind of what people were facing, right? You know,
Mm-hmm.
and threats and so forth. It's like you really don't want to get in a violent situation. You don't want things to escalate. Um, and so it may be something, I'm actually looking at this after we talk, but it'd be interesting to look at the research on this. Sort of, is there a tendency so you don't want violence in your group. Like that's not going to be beneficial to anyone. So maybe just something inherent in most people or many people to like want a certain degree of social harmony to avoid conflict. I don't know. It's an interesting thought.
I suppose like on a psycho-spiritual level, there's that, and it's something we all kick around in different conversations that we've had, but that like authenticity question.
Yeah.
How much does it take to push people off of authenticity? And like the numbers don't have to be that big. You
Yeah.
get three or four people, and it might push people into some kind of weirdly artificial version of who they are. So yeah.
Well, let's loop this one more layer back. Let's go to Psalms,
Okay.
as they
Yeah.
say it, as the kids say, Psalms. So Old Testament Psalms 23:7, and I know because this is the only proverbs or whatever that I have tattooed on me, but it is there. So it says, "As a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. He may laugh and eat food, but he is not with thee." So it's a representation. It's a euphemism to say that like the internal portions of somebody may not be expressed externally, and to that be cautious of that. And there's one from what is it? Is it Chuangza or who is it that says be cautious, be leery of a man whose belly does not jiggle when he laughs.
Oh, I wonder if it is a
Oh,
Chuangza thing, or maybe it's a Chinese proverb,
seems
just
like
like
it may be
overall.
yeah, I don't know. It's not if it but probably more Lao Tzu than
Maybe
Chuangzi,
Lao
but
Tzu, yeah. Yeah, but it's the same. It's the same thing, right? It's this fake. If you're not actually laughing, but laughing at something, how genuine is it? It's how authentic is that?
yeah,
Yeah. But there's the Gnostic one too, right? If you bring out what is with that which is within you, what you bring out will save you. If you do not bring out that which is within you, that what you don't bring out will destroy you, right?
Mm,
You get the real strong statement of that, right?
hmm.
If that runs through, I mean, part of it will be to me in these conformity things will be, okay, what does it do to the group once people start to dissent or, those
Right.
kinds of questions. And the other part, which is such a big theme for us on this thing, is like, how do you get to some authentic headspace?
Hmm.
At least in part, you're going to have to learn how to resist these things and maybe recognize like it doesn't take a lot to push you off your game potentially, right? It's not a
Right.
lot of,
yeah.
you
And I think we you can make a fair assessment that society doesn't really, at best, it doesn't care about you being authentic, and at worst, it does not want you to be authentic. It
know,
actively really discourages it, right? It wants you to conform, right?
Yeah.
Kind of a weird way of looking at it because you're almost looking at a society as its own individual entity, which I don't really want to do. But yeah, for it's sort of like no, it's if you want to have some sort of authenticity to go within the self, explore the self, understand the self, right? At some level, you need to reject society, right?
Hmm.
Um, Pretty hard to find any sort of authentic self without doing that, right?
It's about like 95% of every conversation Ryan and I have ever had in our entire lives. But very true.
It's true. I just I
Yeah.
don't see any other way you can do it, right? I mean,
Yeah.
I'm open to being wrong, but
Yeah. I mean, I'd love to be wrong, but I don't know. I just don't see it. Yeah. So I guess maybe the moral for me on this part is like it doesn't take a lot, and maybe it's something that to develop the awareness of if we're trying to get to like this, like how we learned about ourselves, we can kind of reflect afterwards and like, oh, did some weird version of me come out? Oh shit, that thing happened. But yeah. Okay, so the next one was a little bit on norms that popped up here, and we had done a whole thing, in the Zimbardo experiment on like social roles and norms. But the one that I found was this little thing about like littering, and it just tries to bring up a couple of things here too. So, uh, if you set up a situation where littering is sort of the norm and they're just doing these artificial setups, you go into an environment and you watch people go through and see how they behave. If littering is the norm, people will do it. So that's one of the things that comes up with it. But especially it'll happen if there's someone else there who like draws attention to that social norm. So if people see a bunch of litter, they're more statistically likely just to go, okay, fuck it, and they'll throw their thing on the ground. But especially if they see another human actually like doing the thing and it establishes sort of the social norm, drawing attention to it, well, then that will like even more so reinforce the conformity and the, social kind of that aspect of role behavior. So, anyways, it just says something about, again, sort of like, I suppose, a level of human vulnerability to this, right? All it takes is someone to demonstrate to you what the conduct is. And all of a sudden people go, oh, that's the conduct. Okay, then. And you just do this thing, right? And it might even for people who might not even be entirely in favor of that conduct outside of that or something. Does that resonate with you from the anthropological perspective too, Ryan?
yeah, I mean that's kind of that social cohesion idea. Of just sort of like, okay, I'm just thinking about this from a Taoist perspective, which we can touch on later. But I think, yeah, it's almost more like if someone, I guess what I'm thinking about in this, and this may not answer your question, but it's sort of like if someone has developed their sense of self, like, are they more resistant to that? And my assumption would be yes. Like,
Yeah.
you're going to be less, you're not going to go with the crowd as much. Um, whereas like, you know, you, whereas if like from a Taoist perspective, and this is kind of, I was thinking about this, if, that you actually don't really want to have a conflict, what you want, you're like, okay, I know myself well enough. I understand what I believe about this. I'm going to look at this situation and, you may have to determine, it's like, am I going to kind of go with the group, or am I going to kind of do my own thing? And usually from a Taoist perspective, you're going to avoid the conflict, right? But internally, you have to remain very strong in your convictions. You just don't necessarily want to show it. It's like this notion of, like, I guess we call camouflage from one perspective. It's like, yeah, I know what I believe and I know what I agree with, but in this situation, I need to be kind of careful here, right? And so I think it kind of goes back to this notion of sort of like, all right, am I going to go with this group because there's risk? Um, or am I going to go, or am I just going to do it because everyone else is doing it, and I'm kind of more falling like a social zombie almost.
I guess it implies like a certain level of like psycho-spiritual awareness then.
Yeah,
You have to be able to be free to choose what you're going to do, because this is, I guess, kind of a freedom question on some level
yeah,
too, right? To be free to do what you want to do, you have to have like almost like multiple levels of like cognitive awareness kicking, where you
yeah,
can say, okay, I'm aware that these things can happen. I could just litter just because I've seen it as a norm. Or maybe
yeah,
I'll just conform because there's a few other people around me who are acting a certain way and I'll get pushed into that space or something, right? So you have to have that meta awareness. And then you also have kind of awareness to go, well, maybe in this particular circumstance, I have my freedom also just to kind of go along with things, which is like a meta on top of a meta or something, right?
yeah.
but that
It,
implies like a certain amount of internal awareness that allows you to be free to do what you need to do in that circumstance, right?
yeah, and I think from a Taoist perspective, you're going to be kind of doing a cost benefit analysis. You know, can I be myself in this situation? And what's the cost for doing that?
Hmm.
And or is there an actual threat here, right?
Well,
Which I
that
need to
almost,
consider.
oh, sorry. Yeah, that almost gets to the next thing because like
Yeah,
there's obviously like risk of punishment
yeah.
as part of this whole thing too. So they talk a little bit about like, okay, what are the risks of punishment? And one of the interesting ones is they can do like kind of cross-cultural stuff. So they talk about like the Bantu people of Zimbabwe. I'm not familiar with that culture or subculture or something, but apparently there's pretty severe punishments for nonconformity. And then I guess when you run these sort of more conformist kind of things within people from a space like that, well, then not too surprising, they conform more and more and more than maybe people even from other cultures because they can feel that risk of like punishment kind of like there underneath the surface just for actions of like nonconformity and noncompliance.
Well,
I
that's
mean, if
happening
we
right
look at
now.
Oh yeah, I was going to say yeah. It's happening right now. It's like, and if we look at let's look at China for example, where basically for the almost 2,000 years, there's been like legalism either explicit or legalism under the guise of Confucianism, or now it's sort of like under the guise of like a quasi communism or something. I don't know what it's it's not communism, but it's like the notion of using fear as a means to get to control people, right?
We don't got to go to China. That's happening right here.
Yeah, and I was going to say, and that's happening right now, is like
Yeah.
very explicit. Like,
Hmm.
if you don't do what do what I say, or speak against me, like there's a threat, right?
Hmm.
And a lot of people will like, be like, okay, I don't want that, So yeah, I mean, it's a thing, right? And and I guess that's kind of the thoughtful person who's sort of like, okay, like I don't agree with this, but I also know if I do this, there may be an actual threat. And so for Americans, I think this is kind of new.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, I think in these psych studies, it's relatively nothing at stake in a lot of these things. So they're trying to get to some subtle aspects of can you get people to conform about stuff where there really isn't that much to lose one way or the other, right? Just the thing of like I'm not conforming with other people. So you pick up on something that's even a bit more subtle. But like what you all are bringing up, if I really start putting something at stake, and we got to this a little bit when we were talking about the attachment theory
Yeah.
aspects of this too, Daniel, like a few episodes ago, if you really get something emotional at stake, or financial, which seems to be the weapon of threat now, right?
Hmm.
Most of it's kind of like financial threat,
Hmm.
really crack people. But there's an underlying, I guess, sort of sense of like fear of punishment that even over things that are kind of small, that you can amplify more and more once you put the actual legit pressures on people. And you're like maybe tapping into some like again, maybe the theory that I have with this, I think maybe you all too, some just fundamental vulnerability in like the human being to be like easily moved on these things, right?
Yeah.
That's like it, right? It seems like there is this fundamental vulnerability, you know, um, which probably makes evolutionary sense, quite honestly, you know, to keep a certain social cohesion, right?
And I smile because we're gonna have to do some
I know.
separate episode on evolution to really hash this fucking thing out because it's,
Eric,
it's
Eric
coming
and
up.
I don't necessarily agree on
I don't
evolution.
know if I agree with anybody about this, and it's fine. I'll be the outlier person on this. I will not conform on this point.
You'll be the voice of dissent.
I'll be the voice of dissent, and they'll go nowhere, but that's fine. And there's a question, I guess, of this too that's raised a little bit of like what happens inside of people within these things, which I guess you were bringing up too, Ryan. Like there's an old book called Things Fall Apart. Did any of y'all have to read that thing ever in your life? Any undergrad time or something?
Is
It's
that that's not the
the
one by
Canadian
Pema?
writer.
That's not the one by Pema Children, right? When
I think
things
she's
fall
just
apart.
like pulling that title out.
Okay.
You're funny on that, Daniel, because all of her books are like that. Things fall apart when bad things happen
Hmm.
that scare you. It's always that same shit from her. Things that you fear, things that you dread.
She's got her audience, you know? She has
Yeah.
her audience.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, if before we go to that, I'm not going to say it, but to highlight the point, I rarely bring up my cultural heritage. And there's a reason for that. because when I do, there's consequences for me. And so I'm not going to do that now, even though I want to. I'm not going to because I do have legit concerns that it will be used against me as it has been in a quiet way financially, you know, losing patients or clients or something like this when I, give my background.
Mm.
And to me, it's such it's like it's such bullshit, so for whoever's listening, don't ask. I'm not going to say, you know I'm from California. That's how different I am, you know what I'm saying? Like that's the level of my difference.
All
But
these patients in the Midwest just being from California, Daniel. That's all it took.
they're like, really, the Bay Area? I said,
Only
hey,
eating motherfucker. We don't want him to stick
that's
any
right.
needles in us.
Yeah. So but it's real, man. I'm telling you, it's real. The internal sense of like inability to share what affected me, what influenced me, whatever, like culturally. Not that I chose it. I'm not like sitting here bragging on whatever. I don't do that. I'm just saying, in the course of conversation, sometimes you say, "Oh, wow, you are, oh, I like German food. My father's side was half German." That's like there's some sense of connection in this way, rapport building. But I'll tell you, I have to keep it. It's very strange for me to have to keep it in my mind to not share things that are true. Not even true, like I believe them to be true, believe them because that is just like some general facts about myself that I have to be like, no, don't share that. You cannot yield, you cannot give, you cannot be your authentic self. It is not accepted. It is not accepted in this setting, even if it's an open kind of sharing forum. You said it right. What is the cost of being myself? And the answer to that is sometimes very high. Sometimes it's very high, and we have to make that calculation, which
Oh,
sucks, in my
I'm
opinion.
really, I'm really sorry it's like that, Daniel, my brother. I wish it wasn't, Love you,
Hmm.
man. Wish it wasn't like that.
Yeah, that's shitty,
Yeah.
man. Thanks for making that point too. Like I think that's an important point to make. And there's a lot of cultures that are pretty oppressive for the individual, and legitimate threats too. Where it's like, hey, um, if you don't do this, like, we're gonna affect you financially, or even with your social support system.
Hmm.
That it's a real thing, and it's not just you that will be affected. It's other people who you care about, right?
Hmm.
And that is a means of control, right?
Yep.
To keep a certain level of cohesion and to kind of keep the culture together. And I think I certainly know a lot of people who've gone through that and growing up with it, and um, it tends to cause a little bit of anger, or as we say in Chinese medicine, a little stagnation, right?
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
There's one more um, that I can mention here. So if we remember, Will Smith went up and slapped Chris Rock a couple
Oh yeah.
years ago on the Oscars, right? Live public television. One man slaps another man because he made a joke. They banned him from the Oscars. Eric, get this, 10 years.
Oh, Will Smith is
Wait,
banned for 10 years.
yeah, 10 years, 10-year ban.
Wow.
Naughty boy. You cannot win for 10 years. You can't even come back here for 10 years. So we could say for physical assault, 10 years. Stiff punishment. I would think we would agree. That's a stiff one. Well, Richard Gere in like 94 or 93, whenever it was,
Know what you're talking about. Yeah.
he
Mhm.
said that he asked for leniency from the Chinese government to the Tibet people of Tibet. Now, just keep in mind, Eric, 10 years for hitting another human being live on television. Richard Gere got a little spanking for that. His outburst also, which did call for no violence, by the way. How many years do you think he got for his indiscretions, Eric or Ryan?
I imagine he was just banned
That
permanently.
was just a lifetime ban.
Yeah.
20 years.
20 years. Okay.
He was banned for 20 years
Yeah.
for asking for compassion. So, if that, I mean, that's control. if there ever was one. So he calculated the cost of his, sense of compassion, his sense of justice in the world, and using the platform that he had at that moment. Um, and they banned him, which is just a crazy, for words in this country. It's not even like he's somewhere else. He's here. Hollywood is here. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? It's just it. Yeah, I don't know.
Oh,
It's
Hollywood banned him?
the
yeah,
Oscars. The
the
Oscars
Oscars
banned
banned
him.
Oh, oh, really?
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Richard Gere for that.
Yes.
Because
Oh,
of
that's crazy. I didn't know that. I thought it was like the China banned him for like
no,
ever.
it's because of the is it the Chinese yen? Is that what it is?
I
Is
don't
that
know.
the
It's weird.
currency? It's about the money.
No,
Mm-hmm.
it's always about the money, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's what's really kind of strange now because there's a political undercurrent within these things that
Yeah.
pops up
Yeah.
there, and like this seems to be the innovation now that's so weird to watch because it's going after everything financially. It's basically that's the threat, and that's the threat against obviously Richard Gere too,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
going after our money.
Well,
So
but the
like,
threat's not just financial, though, that we see certainly in our country. It's also
oh,
like just,
there's other ones too. There's physical
yeah,
ones. That's true.
yeah,
Yeah,
it's
yeah, the
true
thing.
physical consequences. Like you throw it
Yeah,
out of the country and like it's wild, it's, yeah.
but a lot of it's financial. That's true. You're right. It's an overlook on my part because a lot of it's like we're just going to pick you off the street from some weirdo ice agent thing. Talking about that like last episode, even right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's that. But I think the thing that seems so striking is like all the financial threat, though. That's even different than a lot. We lived through like Guantanamo and stuff, right? We're just going to pick people up and stick them someplace on an island somewhere, right? But this is kind of odd in terms of its use of finances. It's even a little bit different too, and the sweepingness of it, I suppose.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Well,
That's
Eric, how important is dissent in general?
well, it's amazing that you asked, Daniel. It's so funny that you ask because it's the exact next thing on these notes. Okay, so the next thing that comes up is like, what's like, they don't again look at reasons why people dissent with this particular discussion, but it gets to like, what is the impact of people dissenting, which is kind of like fascinating for us, and what can consider it as like maybe at the end of all of this, what's the role of spirituality and dissent? Like, how entwined are those two things? And I'm curious to hear what you two think. But in terms of the little literature part of this, um, any dissent can like be a factor in breaking sort of spells of conformity. And what they kind of show is if it doesn't take a lot of people to induce conformity, it doesn't necessarily take a lot of people to induce dissent either. So instead of some of like the classic studies, like you show people the lines and you try to get people to conform to agree that two lines don't match. Like these are some of the studies that they're running, right? To
Hmm.
boil this down to isolate this factor. And we have different episodes on these things. It's called the Ash experiments. But anyways, even one
Yeah,
person,
The Stanford. Oh, that was the Ash one. You're right. Sorry.
Ash one, yeah.
Yeah,
So,
the one we did previous was the Stanford prison experiment.
yeah, that one is curious because I don't know if anyone, you'd never be able to run that again. So how do you figure out if you can even break that would be interesting, right?
Right. Right.
Can't even do it. But, in those kinds of things, the research apparently shows that even if you have like one person dissenting, that could already like create a crack within a
Yeah.
group of like dissenting people, or they'll if it's only one subject in the group, but you all are asking about numbers earlier, well, that person can start to refuse to dissent. So you have a bunch of
Mm-hmm.
people who are all collaborating.
Mm-hmm.
One person said, a number of them are going to say the wrong answer, the obvious wrong answer, whatever it is, right? And you get one other person that will resist before the true subject of the experiment, and then that person will start to resist too, and it doesn't take a lot. And the weird part about it is it doesn't even have to be right. The person may still be wrong,
Mm.
but not even agreeing with the rest of the group, but just the fact of someone dissenting creates an opening. So it kind of shows like just dissent period of any type can start to snap this thing open, which I find kind of interesting. And I think even important for like a podcast, little thing like ours, or who's ever out there trying to make a little bit of noise, all it takes is some dissent. The next thing you know, that opens up the possibility, which I guess from like a social psychology point of view, that's, I guess, kind of nice, right? It doesn't take a lot, and you don't even have to really agree with the person, because like they could have it rigged up so that person's also giving a wrong answer, but it opens up the possibility like, okay, fuck it, I'll give the right answer now, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of interesting, and it raises maybe something that we all would care about. Like you do a little bit of dissent in your life, and maybe that starts to crack open some of the rigidities around this. I don't know. What do y'all think about that? Does that feel optimistic to you too? Or
Um,
not?
yeah, I mean, you think about, I mean, maybe like when I think about, I'm not going to project my own thoughts onto you, but when I think about like my own like spiritual path, like just you have to reject certain, you have to dissent against certain norms, right? And I think Eric and I, you have talked about like we were growing up, and we're just like look at sort of, hey, this is what mainstream culture says you're supposed to do, and Daniel imagines the same, and a part of you just sort of like no. And then just at the individual, the internal level, that creates a crack, right? That creates a crack for maybe you to begin to like explore. It's like, no, oh, there's something interesting in here, right? And so if we project that onto larger society, yeah, I mean, you see a dissent, you see another view, another perspective. It's like, oh, maybe I need to explore this, and then someone else does, and then you get movements, and then we would call this, in anthropology, we'd call this like, contestations of culture. You have differing ideas opposing each other, and usually one's gonna win out, right? It's kind of how things grow, both internally and externally.
I think it's nice to think that like it doesn't take too much to start like even shaking that a little bit, based on this
Yeah,
kind of way of thinking, right? You
sure.
know, so that's kind of cool. Okay, then they get to like styles of doing this. And on the style question, they say, well, what seems to be most persuasive? And I've wondered about this too. So on the one hand, you want it to be forceful and persistent and like unwavering. So the more the person who's being the centaur, stays with their like, no, I'm not going along with this. I'm not going along with this. They're forceful, persistent, and they just don't vary. That seems to have an impact on people, right? And that can break up some of this dynamic of people just sort of complying or conforming, right? But the other part of it, it's supposed to be kind of balanced by sort of the idea of being flexible and like open-minded. So you need a combination of things. You need like a consistency of consent of dissent. Okay, I'm going to consistently do this. I'm going to consistently do this, and I'm not going to change, right? Uh, uh, Not in the stubborn way, but just in a way that is like, no, I'm going to. If I think something is wrong, I'm going to be persistent in that. But on the other hand, you don't want to look hard-headed or something, right? That kind of like breaks the impact of that, right? In terms of the social psychology idea, you have to appear to be open-minded, a flexible person, and not being dogmatic necessarily. And that seems to have like the biggest impact on this.
Yeah, so we have been, these two words have been coming up pretty much in every episode, cognitive dissonance, right? And I think when I was going to say something earlier, but I'm glad I held it. So you're doing two things. Number one, you are looking at the purview of the greater that you are in, whether it's a small group of people or society as a whole, and asking, is this true for you? Right? And this is just by yourself. So you have to do that first on your own. You have to, go through your critical thinking process and just say, does this fit with me? Is this rational? Does this feel right? All the sorts of things that happens. And then be able to, again, like this, ask this question, which I find very interesting, ask, what's the cost of being myself with this belief in the greater simultaneously? And then you have to see what the cost is for that. And then do you do like what Ryan was saying and like, conform but have your own beliefs where, in order to, cost benefit analysis based on the situation? Or can you be your authentic self in the face of the costs? Right? If there is no cost, and how loud, how boisterous are you willing to express yourself? And then the other part that I am thinking about is that like I am aware that, we get some feedback from some people sometimes. And so, not everybody agrees with what we're saying. But that's the point. The point is that not everybody is going to agree with how you think. So how Eric thinks, how Ryan thinks, how Daniel thinks, or how you, the listener right now, is hearing this and thinking. The goal of this is not necessarily to get someone to change their mind. The goal of this is to get you, the listener, to pay attention to where you are in relation to the sea of thoughts that is surrounding you and ask, is this mine or not mine? Does this fit with me, my moral compass, what I believe to be important or not? And then to say, can I express my distaste or displeasure or disdain for disideas? You know what I'm saying? Like, is that a possible thing? And understanding that not everybody is going to agree with you. And so I wanted to say that because I realized that we hold Eric, you and me for sure, and of course with Ryan as well, we hold very deeply compassionate views for humanity as a whole. We are, we're in the wellness field. We're, Chinese medical doctors. We practice acupuncture, herbs. We teach like healing techniques to many students over years and years and years, and our patients and our friends and our family, and to the people listening to this right now. This is a kind of a psychological healing in a sense, So this is who we are. I am also aware that there are many people who believe in the stupid shit that they actually say, even though it is antithetical to my own personal, deeply held beliefs that are just for the betterment of humanity. And I have to understand that that is going to always sit improperly with me. So I'm not going to change anybody's mind about what they believe. I may disagree with the culture in general on many things, but at the end of the day, all I can do is maintain who it is that I believe that I have cultivated up to this point and continue to try to be that, accepting the risks and rewards when I have the opportunity to express that to the outside world.
Yeah, Daniel, I think you bring up a really interesting point, which I've been thinking a lot about, which is this notion of, um, and I almost think about it in sort of like, I think about the hero, like the archetype of the hero. Now, I realize it doesn't seem like it's connected, but it's going to connect, right? And, the hero sacrifices himself for the greater good, right? Um, and then you think about the archetype of the jester or the joker, right? And the joker is like, well, no, I'm not going to sacrifice myself. I'm going to survive. I'm going to find a way to survive this. But they don't actually lose themselves in that process,
Mm,
uh, from the way I read it. And so this is kind of an interesting approach to conflict. Is like, um, and again, sort of thinking from the Taoist perspective, the Taoist would say, look, yeah, you may not agree with this, but you actually have to consider the ramifications for your actions. Like,
hmm
how is it, a Taoist is not going to die. The Taoists are not heroes, right? Um,
Not martyrs, I guess.
they're,
Like
they're not martyrs. Yeah, it's
they
heroes,
might
but
be heroic, depending on what you define the hero
yeah,
archetype to be, but they're not going to be martyrs.
they're not going to be martyrs. They're,
Pick
they're not
those
going to be
two
the ones.
archetypes up. You don't have to be a martyr to be a hero, right?
Although oftentimes the heroes will sacrifice themselves. I mean,
Yeah, but
especially from like a Western tradition, right?
yeah,
Yeah, and so I guess from a Taoist perspective, no interest in that. They'd be like, okay, I'm going to do my thing. And as Daniel mentioned, it's like you really have to cultivate the self to kind of know who you are and kind of what you're willing to do, in a given circumstance. It's a really interesting question, right? Probably one we'll like, come back to later.
I guess the thing that strikes me about it is like if we, we're diagnosticians, so if
Yeah,
we diagnose the problem on some level of as being like conformity,
yeah,
right? That is the problem, right?
right,
And that's our theory behind cult. So if
yeah,
you diagnose like that is the thing, then
hmm
it strikes me about each in your own way saying, but kind of echoing back to what you were saying, Daniel, specifically, like it's not so much even that you agree with the what the other person says. The research doesn't say that. You might disagree with them. They might
hmm
actually be wrong from your perspective.
yeah,
But just the fact that somebody disagrees has a power to it, right? And that strikes me as something interesting, right?
hmm
So then the thing becomes, can we break the spell of conformity or break the spell of cult just by having dissent, right? Now, of course, what Ryan's bringing up, and I think this is something deep, and Ryan and I have talked about this off mic, you're not going to dissent to the point where you're going to like throw yourself in front of a charging mob if
yeah,
you're a Taoist and get yourself trampled, because that actually cost benefit analysis won't survive. That's not worth it.
right,
Right. And Ryan and I have talked about this before, so I know kind of like what he's alluding to there and other conversations we've had. And it's been really interesting, even about the time now. To what extent do you expose yourself? Even what you were bringing up, Daniel, right? To what extent do I expose myself because I don't think I'm going to have an impact and the cost of benefit analysis doesn't pay off and this isn't spiritually wise.
Hmm.
Like just to get myself crushed over something where maybe I'd be better off cultivating myself, and just not putting myself into that position where the other parts of what I'm doing are so important that they're going to be ruined by actions that aren't going to produce much results, right? So no one's going to say that. That isn't wise. Then it doesn't, it's not Taoistly wise or maybe wise in any sense. But the other part would be like, if it is the case that if you just get some dissent, then all of a sudden it starts to crack things up. That strikes me as having a powerful idea too. So,
Well, I mean, I think we can just look. I mean, I think those are all valid points. And just thinking about this, I mean, this podcast is a means of dissent, right?
yeah.
It is a means of dissent against a social norm, like many social norms, right? Um, and it is in some ways direct, but in most ways it's kind of indirect because it's approaching things from more the psycho-spiritual level, right? So it's not like physically forceful, right? And so, like, and we, if we're going to be like more Taoist about this, or even Buddhist to a certain extent, like you're not going to be super direct. You're gonna kind of go around. You're going to go around. You're going to be indirect
You're
and
giving
kind of
away our shit, Ryan. We're
what's
trying to
that?
be sneaky and you're just outing us. We're trying to be all sneaky and you're just outing us. That's
No,
it.
but I want to be a little bit direct with this, to be
Yeah,
honest.
Yeah, yeah.
yeah. But that's kind of how you're like you're not out there waving a flag and like marching, with the gun. Like you're trying to approach things from a deeper level, like to and I think something because I used to be a little more like that when I was younger. But I also think that we can affect change on a daily basis with our patients or our students, and that may it's kind of the you're kind of working from the internal to the external in some
External, yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, I think from what you were saying, Daniel, like even if some people are like, fuck these guys, I don't agree with them at all.
Yeah,
If
fuck you too.
yeah, no makes the point of making you go, well, wait a minute, they're saying something different. Maybe it makes me think, maybe I should think something different. Maybe I'll come up with my own conclusion.
Hmm.
You broke the conformity spell, and that's the positive what we're trying to do. You don't have to
Hmm.
agree with us, but if it is true that just hearing some people dissent opens up space for other people to dissent in their own way, I mean, that's kind of the goal on some level, right? Even if
Yeah.
people, hey, it's okay. Yeah.
Yeah, and the deeper point is like not agreeing to just simply disagree, not disagreeing for the sake of disagreement
This
is
is
where
like
you're
trolling or something, right? We're not
it's like
trying to.
it's like yeah, it's like where you're coming from. Like, are you disagreeing on because you're standing on business, or are you disagreeing because you're a contrarian? And those are both fine, but one is going to take you further if you have a sense of like again a sense of self, a moral compass, a strong ideological stance, political. Even if you disagree with somebody else on whatever, but they're still in your in group, you have to be able to have the conversations with them, or you have to be able to have the interactions with them that show your autonomy, or else who are you if you're not being who you are? Who are you at that point? It just I don't know. It's again the cognitive dissonance for people to choose to intentionally not be who they are is just a very hard choice to make when there are not great consequences at stake. Now, I'm going to agree with Ryan on this that I think a lot of these are hardwired. And Eric, we talked about this a couple episodes ago. You talked about this as a vulnerability, and I talked about this as a tendency. And you asked me if that language matters, and I said yes, it does matter because I think like I'm the anthropologist when Ryan's not here, just from my own little evolutionary shit.
Oh, you're an
Um,
ego psych person, both of you.
yeah, for sure. Because I think that it is a safety mechanism, right? That there's safety in numbers. So people will look for other people who agree with them in general, and then they're more willing to continue to want to agree than disagree. It's like if you talk with somebody who you don't have the same ideological views as, you're gonna agree on many things. But if you weren't talking to them, you're probably gonna argue at each other from across the bow far more than when you're face to face for the most part, because there's just a human tendency to want to be like, yeah, see, look how much we agree on. We're reasonable people versus like, you're a fucking asshole. You know what I mean? Like it's just that's just kind of generally how I feel. But in some cases, like you have to take a stand about what you think and what you believe in. And that might be, I don't know, at the cost of some other people. But I also realize that's also feeding the conspiracy folks. So, you know, there's that part of it as well.
Well, maybe
You
they,
know, it's interesting. Go
sorry.
ahead. Go ahead, Eric.
Yeah, sorry, Ryan, go ahead, please.
It just made me think about sort of like, I kind of grew up in this sort of academic environment, and um, I remember my dad, like I didn't we oftentimes don't agree on things, really not enough, but many things we don't did not agree on. And but he was always staunch because he's a university administrator, and he was like the one thing I remember really would piss him off is like when like because he agreed with the sacredness of the academy, meaning that like you need diverse opinions on a campus. Doesn't matter if you agree with them, right? That place is supposed to be left better word sacred, for people to have free discussion, right?
Mm.
It was supposed to be the one place where you can say what you want to say, and there really shouldn't be these crazy repercussions. And when you don't have those places, I think from a Tibetan Buddhist perspective, it's encouraged, and kind of ancient Greece, it was encouraged. You want debate, you want discussion, you want dissent, you want diversity of voices because you want an honest intellectual view of things, right? Um, and I think what we've seen, socially, is the eroding of our educational system, but also the eroding of like intellectual debate, or the discouragement of it, right?
Yeah, like, I mean, we're getting maybe towards the end of this episode on some level, so I'm going to suggest maybe we save some of this little material for next time we hang out, and wrap this up. When we, next time, like this stuff on dissent, there's some other kind of cool stuff to say. But, I mean, in terms of like the undercurrent of what's happening now, is a lot of this like intellectual freedom is like being attacked, right? I mean, it's
Mm-hmm.
like is what's sort of in many ways at stake, right?
Yep.
Of course, some people are being physically attacked too, but they're a lot of times they're being physically attacked over like ideas,
Yeah.
just stuff that they said or they wrote, right?
It's crazy. It's crazy to like think that you have students who are protesting, right? Peacefully being targeted by the government, right? I mean, that's like unthinkable, a year ago.
Yeah, no, it's true. It's
Well,
true.
from and I haven't done a ton of research into this, I just sort of came across this earlier. And apparently the beginnings of the kind of the anti-apartheid movement happened on universities in South Africa.
Mm.
And that then began now I'm sure there are people who are far more versed in the local sociological history than I am. I heard this in passing today because they were discussing this topic here of the dissent, right? Which is what we're talking about, and that so they are actively cracking down on this now because that is the place where it's the birthplace of ideas, right? And so if you can stop the birthing of the ideas, then the opportunity for them to spread is decreased. And so whether you agree or disagree with what people are protesting, it is a right of the people here in this country to be able to do so. And one has to be very cautious as to wondering why it is that any idea should be snuffed out. Because if it is meritless on its face, well then what is to be scared of? But if there is validity behind it, oh, well, then maybe there is something to be fearful over at that point. And I think anybody should ask that question. And again, some of this is going to play, be the pro conspiracy folks, right? They're going to say, yes, that's right. But if it fits, if the shoe fits, fuck it. Not literally, but I mean, if it's a hot shoe, I
Unless
get
Yeah.
you.
that's your kink, in
You
which
have a
case
choice.
not
You can
shame.
wear it or you
You
can
fuck a shoe, you're not judging.
fuck a shoe, wear
That's
the
just the
shoe.
opening here.
We don't yuck anybody's yum. And if you got a foot fetish, I'm all, good for you.
Fuck as many shoes as you want.
That's right. That is our motto.
That's we're getting some t-shirts printed. It's gonna
Yeah.
go on this mug over here with this little icon. Fuck as
Yeah.
many shoes as you want. Sorry, says
I
it's
love
okay.
that. Yes.
Um, no, but I think I'm really happy. Talk about dissent and agreement. I'm happy in the sense that we all talk with one another, right? We're friends, and I have conversations with Ryan or with you, Daniel, and and what I really find happening is we're all kind of finding our way to a similar overall thought process, which is like if we watch what's happening now, one of the ways of looking at this, and I've been a little bit frustrated by it, would be like, well, let's consider this issue and that issue or that issue over there. But I think that like misses the point of it. I don't think it's like, is this a good issue or that issue? What's the government doing here? What's the government doing here? I don't think that's what it's about. I think the whole question is about this. On the one hand, we've been trying to frame it in terms of like a cult thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's part of our diagnosis. But the other part is like a coup thing. There's an overall kind of power grab happening, right?
Mm-hmm.
And, as far as it goes, we can look at different ways of framing this. Some of this is a certain kind of like religious nationalism or something driving a lot of this. So the different things that are happening that are driving this along. But I mean, I found that to be like, I mean, to get like philosophical, it's almost like an Occam's razor thing. We all know this, but if people listening aren't familiar with this, it's like the most simple explanation, maybe just the right one. You know,
Mm-hmm.
what you're really having is just like different power grabs and like different parts of the social fabric to just crush people who would do what the theme of this episode is, which is fucking dissent.
Mm-hmm.
And it's, what you're saying, Daniel, right? Or maybe Ryan, both of you, like it's preemptive,
Mm-hmm.
right? We're going to preemptively crush dissent in the beginning, right? And we're not going to let it leak out. And it does, I mean, it's nice talking this through with you both because it makes it all click. If it doesn't take that much dissent to make people start to like question, if that's what the social psychology research says, well then we got to stop it beforehand,
Mm-hmm.
because in a certain sense it's contagious, right? And you don't even have to agree with the people. Just the fact that they're dissenting already has a certain power to it. So no, we're going to get you like a priori, before you even have the chance to do it. And
Mm.
I think it's good just to call that what it is, as opposed to debating, oh, what was the position on this thing or that thing or whatever. No, I think it's okay just to make that more sweeping statement.
Mm-hmm.
Call a thing what it is.
And that's been kind of like the Chinese dynastic and PRC approach, right? Is sort of like very severe punishment, like for any sort of dissent. Like that's and it's been successful, sadly, right? You just crush anyone and make the punishment so severe that they won't do it again, and you go for the root. You target the leaders and so forth, and like that's a thing.
Same has been in Russia.
Yeah. Hmm.
I mean, so it's kind of a playbook, obviously,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, it's a
Mm-hmm.
playbook.
And this is like maybe, not as severe as like those two places, but it certainly has those hints of it, right? We're going to
Yeah.
do this thing, right? And
Mhm.
it certainly is this sense of like, well, we know who our enemies are. So we're going to make sure we target them. And it's been like the simplest way to understand it. I know like we're getting to the end of this, but it's one of
Yeah.
the things I've been trying to pay attention, and I think for all of us, like our sense of like what we care about politics is here and what we care about spirituality is up somewhere off the screen. Like our interest in spirituality is a lot more than our interest in politics across the board for all three of us. But if the situation gets fucked up enough, you feel like, well, I better pay attention to what's happening.
Mm-hmm.
And that we do this, try to make at least episodes that are somewhat helpful to help people think about it for themselves, and come to their own conclusions ultimately. Try to be informative on some level. But what I found to be, yeah, again, like, the most helpful is just to go through and say, yeah, let's look at what this overall through is.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, we're diagnosing. And
Yeah,
as
call it what it is.
as practitioners, yes, we can treat symptoms, but sometimes then you end up chasing symptoms.
That's a
And
kind of the thing of like, oh, sorry, Dan, I don't mean to interrupt, but that's what it's felt like. Okay, here's this issue over here. Let's talk about
right,
that. That's a symptom. Here's an
right.
issue over here. Let's talk about that one. I mean, that's perfect language for it. Thank you for that. I was almost
Yeah.
trying to. This is
Yeah.
this is symptom, but there's an underlying disease, and let's just
Well,
call the disease
that's
what it is.
what we're talking
Yeah.
about is like not
Mhm.
chasing the symptoms around because as a good practitioner, regardless of the system that you're working within, you want to find out, okay, what is the root cause? Can we find a root cause? Is there on a Western side, is there an allergy, to some food or some environmental toxin, or is it an autoimmune thing? Like, how does that manifest? And is that why you're having all these weird things happening? Or, in Chinese medicine, we'll say, we're not going to go into that because that's people don't understand that stuff. But anyways, looking for a deeper root cause, one or two causes that then give these symptoms. If you treat that, you can treat the root then. You don't have to treat the branch anymore. And so that is essentially what we're trying to do is find and or highlight and then dissect essentially the deeper root causes as to what is occurring so that not every symptom has to be chased. Not every detail has to be looked at. And I'm not saying don't pay attention to the details. I'm just saying look past it a little bit. If you're being attacked by a swarm of bees, look at why were they attacking you, as opposed to saying I hate bees. Like, yes, you may not like them, but you also threw rocks at their hive. So like now they're coming after
You're
you.
covered in honey or something like that. You're covered in
Yep.
like pollen.
Yeah.
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 Well,
So
and if
that's the point.
and kind of like adding on to that is like if you chase symptoms, you are going to, and Eric's going to recognize this statement. You expend way too much energy, right?
Oh, yeah.
You tire yourself out,
Correct.
chasing these symptoms, right? And but and you've missed it. By the time you actually realize, oh, I should have been treating the root, you're exhausted. Um, and
And maybe
so,
the analogous thing would be like, why is the government doing this? And why is the government doing that? And why is the government doing this? Well, they're just trying to fucking seize control of stuff. They're just trying to obliterate their opposition, and at a certain point you can analyze like why this or that particular action, but the parsimony of the thing, the Occam's razor just says, okay, we're trying to wipe out everyone who might be our potential opposition, and we're doing it in advance. I just found that part, I'm like, I feel like it's sort of a comfort that there's a certain agreement amongst us because I found that part to be a little bit difficult, you
Yeah.
know, like let's debate whatever this action meant and let's debate whatever that action meant. And you're like, really, it's just all part of an overall
Yeah.
sort of strategy. You might as well just call it for what it is. It's a kind of
A
coup.
disease.
It's a kind of a disease in a coup. Maybe what we're trying to do, which is a little bit unique, is also trace it back to like some underlying psychological
Hmm.
thing, that there's an underlying sort of social psychology, cult psychology
Oh, I think it's even simpler than
problem.
that. It's called daddy issues.
Big Daddy. Come back to spank everybody that you don't like. Isn't that what they were? Isn't that the Mel Gibson thing?
That was yeah, but more
Yeah.
importantly, just like your own issues of not, I mean, look, we've talked about this before, but and we'll wrap it up. Um, Societal issues are independent issues increased exponentially, right? So,
Right.
so a charismatic leader who has issues with their parents is going to manifest those issues in the realm that they find themselves in. And if you find yourself in a realm that you could influence society, then you are going to influence society with the issues that you obviously fucking have. It
Talking
is
about like the daddy issues amongst the great leader. That's what you're saying.
Yeah, but it's not just
People have
there's
daddy.
there's a multitude. It's a multitude. It's not just a singularity. It is a shared thing. People have trauma. People have psychological shit that is unresolved. And instead of taking the time to resolve it, they're going to be reactive to their own psychological processes and affect the world. So instead of changing myself, I'm going to change the world. So instead of putting shoes on my feet, I'm going to cover the entire ground in rubber, so I could continue to walk barefoot. Like the amount of trees and labor that that's going to take will far exceed that it would be for you to make some shoes for your own feet. So all I'm saying is make your own fucking shoes.
Well, it's going to be an interesting one as we go forward because part of this is the idea like, is this happening because there's personal trauma amongst the people in the country? Or is it happening because you'll get what I mean with this, like especially Ryan and Daniel too, we'll be talking about this over episodes, or is it like a sociological and an anthropological thing? Where do you put your analysis at, right? Is
Yeah,
it
I
like
mean,
individual vulnerabilities, or is it, or whatever you want to say, or is it more like you set up a certain rules of the game and then people get forced into things, right? That's the Durkheim question too that we'll be getting,
Hmm.
and
you know.
I think
But both could be true. Yeah.
we've talked about this before, where like it's like I can't remember if I've talked with both of you about it, but it's in anthropology, like sometimes you do this thing where like you look at the micro because it's reflective of the macro,
Hmm.
right? Um, the individual will reflect these different notions in society. And society will reflect these different notions which are embedded in the individual. You can study small things and they represent larger societal norms. Um, I think an interesting question to think about, going forward is sort of what is it about, present societies, right? Not just the United States, that make them so vulnerable. And I think one of those things happens to be like there's really not a strong focus on any sort of meaningful um, actualization, to use your Carl Rogers term, right? That makes people vulnerable, right? Because they haven't explored themselves, and kind of hint upon something else, which I don't know if you guys have talked about this, but we may is like, you know, what is your identity rooted in? You know, is it something that's ephemeral? Is it something that's more solid? Is it something that has a history to it? Um, or is it just why is it that these people can be influenced so easily, right?
Yeah, well, it's a good question, and if, Eric, you want to say your final piece, and we're gonna cap
Yeah,
it here.
one of the things that I like, again, just to give props to both of you, one of the things I find very clarifying of this for me is that I do think that there's like sort of the social psychology and sociology parts where the structure of the thing starts to form the folks.
Yeah,
I also love what both of you are saying in that, like, how do you start to break out of that? Kind of what you're bringing up, Daniel, you, Ryan, in your own way too, is that you have to have some kind of individual identity that may be partially getting over aspects of your own trauma that lock you in a box that don't allow you to break out as an individual. And then the other side would be exploring myself enough where I have a strong enough sense of my own self that I can like resist. And then
right.
maybe part of the positive of that would be if this stuff is true on the social psych level, the minute people start doing that, then that starts to crack things, which is sort of like, my hope with this. You know,
Hmm.
yeah.
And you kind of need to do like, and that takes effort, right? And so when society is telling and putting all this pressure on you to do one thing, it takes a lot of effort and energy to do the opposite,
And a
right?
certain amount of courage.
And courage, right? And
Oh yeah,
that's
and discipline,
yeah.
regularity. It takes a
Mhm.
long time. It's not a clear path. You don't get results immediately, and when you do, it's hard to even say what it's from, and so then you want to give up, and you're not quite sure where you're headed, and there's so many choices to what you want to learn and get into, and how do you develop yourself, and what does that even mean? And people don't talk about it. It's not a common thing. You attach yourself to an ideology or your work or your family or whatever, but like how much of that did you choose yourself? So yeah, it's a lot. But that's why we have these conversations and that's what we talk about and that's the benefit in doing what we do.
And just thinking about this, I know we're kind of ending this up, but like
Yeah, we
thinking
are.
about this from Chinese medicine, practitioners is sort of like, and when you were talking about that, Daniel, it just made me think of like our patients, right? And so they're like, well, where do I start? What do I do? Like I have all these different things I could be doing, all these different things are wrong. And then our explanation is going to be like, okay, let's start simple. Let's cultivate this one thing first, right? And then from that you can grow.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's right. That's
Maybe
exactly
that
right.
will spread.
That's right. And that's the
That
perfect.
starts happening, then that starts to spread. Yeah.
That's right. And I think that's a place to end it. Start simple. Start simple. Yeah. I tell my clients, people who are interested in, they want to do some kind of internal reflection or meditation or something like this, even for de-stressing, if you want to call it that. They're like, well, give me some techniques or what do I do? I say, oh, no, 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 no. You just need to find a place in your house that you can do it first. And then you sit in that place for like 3 minutes a day for the next week or 2 weeks. That's it. Just sit there or lay there or whatever. Just go there. That's your place. Start and find the place, and then we'll start to put something in there. clean it up, maybe vacuum, dust it. I don't know. You know what I mean? Like create the space for yourself. It doesn't have to be some elaborate thing. But then once you have that set for yourself, then you have a place to go. Now you at least have a spot to do it in. And this is simple enough to begin that you can start to like, you got to till the soil before you could put the seeds in. Well,
Yeah.
gentlemen,
Maybe the last thing I would say is like dissent
also,
in the episode.
yeah,
Dissent, folks.
also
Let's
this.
back to
Yeah.
dissent.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Well, thanks for joining us, Ryan. Really appreciate it. Eric, as always, thanks for doing this. We're like solidly, almost 5 years strong here. We'll be in July. So we're making our way to our I don't know, what the 10-year anniversary is what, like silver, and then 20 is gold. So I don't know what's 5 years, copper, something like this.
Copper,
And
let's assume bronze. I don't know.
bronze, yeah, they're still good metals though. Don't you know what I mean? We're not gonna brush them away. But
Pewter. I don't know.
yeah, but as always, guys, thank you so much. This is really great. I enjoyed our conversation. Audience, thank you so much for listening, watching, consuming, however you do, whether you're seeing the full episode. And if you do, your attention span is in the top 5% of the entire world. Congratulations. And if you're just seeing clips or whatever, like, subscribe. If you have any questions for us, as usual, or comments, or want us to cover something in a podcast series, please hit us up at ginandtantra@gmail.com. Follow us on the gram at the Gin and Tantra podcast, or leave a comment here in the YouTube comment section. Yes, do it. Do it. All things. We don't care. Love, hate, and indifferent. It's all good. We appreciate it. And share our work if you find it useful, or if you don't like it anyways, spam someone. That also we'll take that as well. For Ryan and Eric, this is Daniel. We'll catch you guys in the next one. Fight the power.